Hello, everybody. You all need to wake up a little bit. Lunch is finally settling in. So I want to call our panel out. And we got Wanda Reeder and Pat Wilkinson and Cheryl Milley. And what we want to do is really have a conversation with you all, a dialogue. I have a few questions to ask of the panelists. We get a feedback here on the microphone. And then I'm hoping that we are going to engage in a big way with you all. So there's plenty of room in the front rows. If you all want to come down to the front as much as you would like as you're walking down, please feel free. So Cheryl Milley, to my left here, is currently the Senior VP and Chief Operating Officer at ERCOT. And she'll tell you in a minute what that is all about and who she is. Before that, she was at Austin Energy. And she was the Chief Operating Officer there as well. And she'll also tell you more about her career. Pat Wilkinson is currently the Vice President, Head of North America Energy Automation Businesses for Siemens. You probably heard the company. It's a very large multinational, one of the six horsemen of the apocalypse that I call. They own everything on infrastructure. And then we have Wanda Reeder, last but not least, Chief Strategy Officer, SNC Electric Company, and also Chairman of IEEE Smart Grid. So I'm delighted that they're here. I'll tell you 2 seconds, my journey to now being the CEO of CMG. I used to be, my claim to fame in energy is I was the CIO at Austin Energy, working with Cheryl, and help build the smart grid in Austin that we have and all the cool things that we have done there. And then before that, I had a career in telecom, computers, and software. I worked, my first job out of school was working for Bill Gates, if you didn't know that. I was the first product manager for Windows. So cool things. So I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves, more importantly, to tell us about their companies and the role they play in this journey of energy evolution and innovation, and then we'll go into some questions. So Cheryl, you want to start us?
Sure, I can. As Andrea said, I'm currently a Chief Operating Officer at ERCOT, and I won't presume that everybody in the room knows what ERCOT does, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. ERCOT is the ISO here in Texas for about 90% of Texas. We manage the transmission grid. We help run the wholesale market and settle that for all of the customers. And there's about 24 million people who depend upon the energy that is within the ERCOT footprint. So we also are responsible for enabling the retail choice in the competitive areas of the state. So we do the switching when a customer decides that they want to have a different energy provider. We enable that switching transaction to make sure that the energy gets billed to the right place. And we also, of course, provide open access to transmission. So we do a lot of interconnection requests for the expanding generation resources that want to come connect onto the transmission grid of ERCOT. So we play a large role in, I think, the success of the economy of the state of Texas by enabling generation by helping to keep a robust and reliable grid essential to all. And first and foremost in our priority is that robust and reliable grid, because that's essential to the economy of Texas. And also enabling a competitive wholesale market so that those same businesses and the same residential customers enjoy predictable and competitive rates. So in my former role, we did not have open access, but I think we were equally committed to maintaining competitive and affordable rates while also pushing the edges of some of what we're talking about. And so also at ERCOT, as anybody who is familiar with it or not, let me just tell you a little bit about what makes up our supply in ERCOT, because despite the fact that Texas only had a renewable portfolio standard of 10% of energy, we've had extreme success in bringing renewable energy into the Texas and the ERCOT grid. And so we see that we've got about 11.7% of the ERCOT energy actually comes from wind energy here in Texas. And so a lot of energy that gets distributed that way. And we continue to see that kind of changing resource mix. And so as the grid operators, some of the things that we're thinking about are the strategies and the thought leadership behind How do we make sure that we maintain reliability while allowing new entrants and different types of services into our marketplace, whether that's expanding wind additionally, combined cycles, customers who can provide generation into the marketplace. We're trying to make sure that we bring everything to the table. And I think a lot probably of what's being discussed here today are things like distributed resource and distributed generation and smart grids, and what role might they play in the future, even for the grid operator, to understand the dynamics of how that is going to change the way that we have procured or our customers have procured energy over the long term. Again, not our direct customers, but those in our marketplace. There might be some really interesting and different changes that come about. And so we're just trying to stay ahead of that curve, looking at the right set of ancillary services, looking at the right set of at least keeping up with what all these other utilities are doing to make sure that if we start to see a different dynamic on the grid, that we understand where that's coming from. So that's at a very high level. What we do is manage that wholesale market and assure the reliability of the transmission grid.
Thank you, Cheryl. Pat?
Yeah, so I, strangely enough, started my career in the auto industry a long time ago. Spent 6 or 7 years working for Ford Motor Company, and so maybe not a traditional start to my career for the group that we have here, but honestly, there are some common dynamics, I would say. Back when I was in the industry then, it was really, the domestic players were getting their lunch eaten by the Japanese, and there was a real drive towards process improvement, continuous process improvement, focus on the customer and delivery of value, value being function per unit of cost maybe, my view of it. And I see some of those same dynamics in play right now in our industry, and not new today. They've been with us for some time. So I left Ford, obviously, and came into the energy sector and spent time at ABB, and now obviously I work for Siemens. Have not heard Siemens referred to as one of the, what'd you call it, one of the horsemen of the
6
apocalypse?
horsemen of the apocalypse.
I'm going to remember that. I'm going to have to translate it to German probably, but yeah, so Siemens does a lot of different things, and if I exclude the mobility side of the business and the healthcare side of the business and focus what I would presume would be the most relevant areas, we really go the full breadth of the value chain from generation all the way to consumption. From steam and turbine, and for me, turbine protection, generation protection, transmission protection, automation control, down through distribution, but again, all the way down through low voltage and point of consumption. You'll find Siemens in aisle 8 in Home Depot, if you're a do-it-yourselfer. So one of the things we would love is that as we're solving problems and growing our business, we're doing it with a full Siemens basket of products. But the reality is, if we're really committed to customers and the problems that our customers have, there are existing investments that have been made. We have to be prepared to be the puzzle piece that fits according to what the demand of the month or the day even would be. So for my part of Siemens, which again is, as Andres mentioned, the energy automation business is in our digital grid business unit. We're focused on protection, control, and automation. And that means being as interoperable, as flexible, as easy to deploy as possible. And I don't think that's been our history. Certainly, I think it needs to be our future. And if I step back and think about the R&D spend that a company like Siemens has, which is, you could say it's a tremendous asset, and you could also say it's embarrassing given the magnitude of it and maybe what historically we've gotten from it. Great global positioning, but one thing I like to get from this kind of an event is a more transparent view of what should be the problems that we're solving. Because I'm going to wager that a lot of what we talk about in this session here is probably not going to be new in terms of the challenges or even new in terms of the technology, but have we accelerated in our ability to make use of the technology or to collaborate on how we use the R&D budget for a company like Siemens, so that at the same time people like me are taking care of our shareholders, we're also taking care of your shareholders, your constituents, and society as a whole. So I definitely see more of those societal drivers in terms of what we're being asked to do, the problems that are that are making themselves visible to us. And that, to be honest, really is more energizing for me personally than probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when it was, how do you take the latest product or solution that we've developed and find a way to get the market to adopt it. Now it's much more about what do we see the market needing, and trying to make sure we're as close as we can be to understanding those dynamics in a way where we can really solve those. And my particular space in Siemens, protection, control, and automation, I think is one of the areas that's changing the fastest in the market. So I have a particular interest in today and the next couple of days, and really trying to see how close are we to what our customers are saying they need, the problems that they're having, and what's holding us collectively back from adapting and solving the problems that frankly are not that new at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yep.
Wanda?
Yeah, it's great to be here at ETS, so thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to have some dialogue. I agree. The opportunity to interact with everybody, it really is tremendous, because I think we're at a point where there is a lot of opportunity for convergence and disciplines, and we all bring our own perspective. So, kind of melting that together really helps to form the vision for the future. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at S&C Electric Company, and in that role, it's really a matter of where do we put the bets for the future. S&C, if you don't know, we are a 100-year-old plus company. We focus in switching, protection, and control. We're firmly in the distribution space. Been bringing smart grids to people for all that time. Started out with the liquid power fuse, and over the years, overhead switches, pad-mounted gear that really didn't talk but performed their function locally. And what we're seeing is that's being interlaced with sensing, communications, software, and it's actually improved the performance of the distribution system significantly, making it actually much more nimble, flexible, resilient, so that we can position ourselves for the future, as we've talked about before. My background, I started out in Northern States Power, or now Excel, and had various roles: conservation load management, planning, led an unregulated subsidiary that did predictive cable diagnostics, moved to Chicago to be with ComEd, and then had an Exelon role where I was vice president in the operations in delivery space, and I've been with S&C now for 11 years. 10 of that, I really grew the service business, because we believe that going forward, solutions are really critical. And so having that engineering, project management, construction capability to help facilitate solutions into the marketplace is really important. And now as Chief Strategy Officer, it's really critical to try and understand, where we're thinking and read the tea leaves, if you will, where the marketplace is going. And, if you look at the chalkboard, it's pretty fascinating to think, yep, climate change, there's certainly a lot of action where every single one of us has seen the implications of our mix changing. It wasn't that long ago that 50% of our generation source in the United States was coal, and that's rapidly changing, rapidly. In fact, probably much more rapidly than any of us thought. But the implications behind that is that we make it differently. We move it differently, because now it's much more distributed in nature. And of course, we're thinking about the consumer in a whole different light. We have to think about what's going on behind the meter, and how to kind of envelope that into the electrical ecosystem in a much different way. And I just look at the paradigm. We created this over 125, 150 years, along the philosophy that centralized generation is going to ebb and flow to whatever the load was going to do. Somebody walked in, turned the switch on, and behind the scenes, that all of the infrastructure is going to, come up or go down in order to match the load and hold the frequency. And what we're doing here is moving that centralized generation and that electrical paradigm into one that's much more distributed. And if you get back into the most simplistic sense of make, move, use, and that's really what we're doing, is we're changing all three at the same time, the piece in the middle becomes very critical in how you enable that to happen, because we have to have much more visibility, flexibility, resiliency in that facet in order to enable both ends to change. So that's what SSC is doing. We're bringing technologies and solutions to the marketplace to enable that. It's well beyond probably what you think of us as a switch manufacturer, in that now we overlay it with power electronics, communications, microgrid solutions, renewable solutions, and it's a great time to be in the industry. Really enjoying it.
Great, great. So to kind of frame how we get going here, the big themes that are really happening, I call it, the three battles going on, idealistically, some are, spiritual and religious holding battles that are going on, and some are just technology, self-interest battles that are going on. But the three battles are pretty much this. So there's a battle going on between renewable energy and fossil fuels. There is another battle going on between centralized generation and distributed generation. And then there is another battle going on between waste versus conservation and efficiencies, right? And those three battles are really the dominant forces that are on the outside impacting the entire ecosystem, right? So with that said, I am wondering if we can, get your views individually, as broad or as deep and detailed as you want on, could you each explain for us sort of what are the current challenges, from your point of view in the industry for the power grid itself, the beautiful 21st century invention of the North America power grid. What are the current challenges?
I guess I'll start. You're looking at me?
Yeah.
So I think the current challenges, you had a good list. You had renewables versus fossil, you had centralized versus decentralized, and you had
Waste versus efficiency.
waste versus
and
efficiency.
conservation.
So I think those are, I don't know that I would say they're battles, right? I think that, perhaps we could look at those as complementary. Is that we have had a theory of centralized stations pushing energy out and keeping frequency in check and matching that. And I think that part's never going to go away, right? Because I just can't believe that we want to give up the reliability aspect of complete disconnection from the grid, right? So that's what makes it complicated, right? So now we have a situation where I can either have my local renewable or I can depend upon a large station renewable. And so how do those blend together? And what is the purpose and use of some of the existing central plants? I think they're complementary to each other, but the interesting thing is they have a balance, right? Sometimes that balance might be a little bit off. And it's looking at the ERCOT marketplace today, this morning, probably for about 5 hours, we had negative pricing. Well, that's largely due to a large amount of wind, right? So, our market's designed on a theory of equilibrium. And so, supply and demand will bring success to market participants over time.
So explain something real quick on that to take it. So because most of the audience are not familiar with the aircraft. So what does that mean, negative pricing? Is somebody paying somebody else when that happens? How does that work?
Right. So people are earning negative, right? So if I want to stay on, I've got to take a negative price. If I'm a nuclear plant and I can't just ramp up and ramp down, I've got to stay on and potentially take the negative price. Didn't look and see if that was, ERCOT wide or if that was just some zones, but that's what happens when it's a negative price. ERCOT's a little bit unique in that it's an energy-only market. So for those large central stations, it's going to be a painful process to go through negative pricing because there is no other income. So unless you're in a vertically integrated utility still or a municipal area where you still have regulated rates that you're charging your customers.
And that is a reality challenge that is created by renewable wind.
That's right. It is. So they're can be painful, but they're also complementary, right? It takes all to come to the table over the course of the year to deliver to the customers and keep reliability. And as a grid operator, we really need to have good tools that help us do that. We've got to have the right ancillary services. We've got to have really good visibility. We've got to have ways of controlling all of that. You talked a little bit as well, not just the renewables piece, but then you mentioned the centralized, distributed. But we talked about that a little bit, I think. And the distributed piece is something that, as a grid operator, we're more and more interested in. Because as we see more and more ideas that people are going to have more and more distributed resource, we probably are going to see some dynamics in the grid that we've not seen before. On the positive side, it gives you an opportunity to really optimize the grid and to not overbuild it. But on a reliability side, as I said, I don't think people are going to want to disconnect from the larger power grids. Although there is storage and there is solar and there's those things as somebody who is completely dependent upon my phone, upon my computer, upon my refrigerator, all of those tools, how many of us really want to take a risk that we want to be self-sufficient in that category? Maybe 10 or 15 down the road. Maybe it's something where somebody's selling me that as a service at my house instead of on the grid. But for right now, I think the customers are going to stay on board. And so we need to figure out how much visibility we need to maintain the reliability that we're responsible for. The last thing about efficiency, well, again, efficiency is a positive thing. It does change our perspective, right? We're an industry where we have gotten paid per kWh. And that is something that we're all starting to struggle with, whether you're the grid operator or the local distribution company or the energy supplier. We're used to being paid on a consumption model. But you know, distributed resource and energy efficiency are really challenging the future there. So I think that that's an area where there's going to be some really smart people that solve that piece of how everybody stays whole. We have a cleaner energy supply, but we don't lose any reliability. And I get some choice in the matter. Because, you know, as I think you also stated, that some of it's just what people really feel good about and how I want to contribute to climate change or something else. And we need to enable that, I think. Probably that's not going to happen at the grid level, but I think it will happen at the local level. And we need to understand the dynamics and the differences it will place on the behaviors of the grid.
Right. Pat?
Yeah, I would supplement what you're saying. Your last point for me is a seminal one, because I think it's a layer that underlays, Andres, what you were talking about. That I don't know that it's conflict necessarily, but blending. And to me, there's some artificial or some external factors, at least some systemic factors that are holding our ecosystem back from finding the right balance. And the right balance might be different here in Texas as opposed to the Northeast or the Southwest or wherever. But a big part of that is, you know, we're dealing with an incredibly complex network that functions at a pretty high level, but it's a lot of aging infrastructure against a backdrop of rising costs to meet the needs and declining revenues too. So we're in a lot of places not dealing with load growth, we're dealing with you know, load reduction, either organic or through efficiency. So, you know, the traditional incentives and the traditional business models, I think, are holding us back from doing what a lot of people would have 5 years ago said we can do. We have the technology and it's the right thing to do. Some of it's happened anyway. I'm curious for Wanda and Cheryl both, because they have utility backgrounds. If 10 years ago, they would have foreseen the renewable penetration that we have today as a point to come back to. But for me, that's really what underlies that conflict that you're talking about, is how do we, you know, how can you expect a business, a utility, to do things that a lot of times are against the interest of the shareholders for the business. We are starting to see that change. We're right now doing a really cool microgrid project in Northern California that involves not just a Native American population, but it also involves local university, the utility, the commission directly involved, and there's an alignment there that is still the exception and it's not the rule. So I think until that really changes, you know, that balance really changes, we're going to continue to have what you're referring to as conflict, because it's not the technology holding us back, at least in my interpretation, but more how do we incentivize the right behaviors and come to terms with the fact that a lot of what can be done and should be done involves cost, and part of that may be giving proper recognition to avoided cost. Because it's not, to me, it's not a question of we can invest in new technology to replace the status quo. It's we can invest in new technology as an alternative to doing more of the same. And so it's not as simple as sometimes we like to make it. I think when you consider avoided cost, you know, that business case looks a little bit different. And it's changing every day. So one of the reasons why the renewable penetration has been as quick as it has is in the case of solar, for example. You know, when we are looking at solar projects right now, we're not building panels, but the cost of panels and a lot of the related equipment is much more commoditized. It's a fraction of what it was before. So you know, the reference points are changing, and I think that's enabling us to, you know, to pencil more projects than we've been able to in the past.
Right. Wanda?
I want to pick up on Pat's question. You know, you were wondering, in the last 10 years, would you have ever thought renewables would have taken off like it did? And it's like, no way. And I contrast or compare that to the iPhone. You know, I love my BlackBerry, had a hard time converting, but everybody did in the room, like literally overnight, right?
Overnight.
And you think about the movie business on Blockbuster videos. There used to be in every single quarter, and then it was Netflix. And so the thing is, when the value proposition changes, and it changes fast enough, usually through technology, but society can really turn quick. And I think that's what happened to us on the renewable game. And there's high potential in power electronics and storage and the like, that this cost curve is really changing what we do fast. And it's interesting because our industry hasn't traditionally moved and been that adept. But if our consumers do it, then guess what? We as an industry have to be there in order to make it all work and be reliable and make sure that we're providing infrastructure to deliver for the digital economy. And sometimes I think about reliability, and often it's what we expect today and looking backwards, but we built the economy on a digital basis, and that reliability expectation is only going to go up as we go forward. So to get back to your point, central versus distributed, foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of how much, when, and where. I don't think that they're competing. I do think it's a blended mix. There is no silver bullet. But the interesting thing is, no matter where you are, the balance is different. In some places, the markets are different. Some places they're developed, other places they're not. It's all over the board. So you really have to kind of figure out your journey within your own toolbox and your own, conditions and characteristics that you have to balance. But I do think it's inevitable that we're going to more of a distributed model. And that means, the tools, the planning, the dynamic operations, it just really changes how we've grown up and designed the system fundamentally. Speaking of protection and control, we designed it for one-way power flow, didn't we? Guess what we're ending up with? Something much different. So, that's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. But I think oftentimes we continue to let our heads go generation, delivery, and then consumer. And I really do think that we're flipping that on its end. Ann talked about some of the interaction piece becomes kind of core, and then it trickles from there. I believe that's true. Figuring out how to truly enable the consumer into a prosumer mode, think about what's behind the meter and how to enable that into the whole ecosystem is a huge opportunity for us that kind of crosses what's been traditional silos that really haven't interacted a lot. So, those really, I think, are the major challenges for us. And then within that, there's a backdrop of cultural change, regulatory change, that I think, even if you have these other technical pieces right, those got to be there as well. Workforce too, and I'll get to that later.
Right. Thank you. So let me keep right along here to keep you guys' juices flowing. So in what you have shared about the challenges and the different perspectives, and I think for the most part you all sort of agreed, but can you share with us what are the key strategies or solutions to solve some of those challenges? So short term, what is being done? What do you see happening? What are people chasing? What is ERCOT working on, looking at around the corner? What's the next thing coming? What are you working on?
Right. So I think that I mentioned some of the things we're working on. Let's pay attention to what's happening down below 100 kV and 138 and make sure that we have an understanding or at least some inside relationship with distribution providers so that we know what's going to happen. Are we going to see a negative flow? Are they ready for that? Are we ready for that? What does that mean? How can we use that as a planning input? I think the other thing that I would say we're cautious of is cybersecurity, right? You all hold up your phones, and we're having a lot of discussions about that iPhone security this week, right? It's been finally broken, I guess. I don't know who's broken it, but I don't know. I've not been doing anything too naughty, so I'm not too worried about it. But I do keep a lot of information on there. But I think that when it comes to having so many resources and so many inputs and so much two-way information, cybersecurity is a must. And so I think that making sure that we've got the people who understand that working at ERCOT is extremely important, whether it's our systems or whether it's the grid. They're all pervasively digital now, right? And so we need to make sure that we've got cybersecurity, cyber awareness, and the talent to make sure that we can continue building that cyber knowledge. I think that's essential, and I think for anybody who's in the room who's in the business, whether it's an equipment supplier, a utility, a grid operator, even a retail provider, they need to understand that. Another part of ERCOT's job to enable that is making sure we've got good sharing of data, the right data as, per protocol, but available to share with folks to help them understand. I think just of the little ERCOT app, and it's available to anybody to go download ERCOT app, and it tells you, do we have enough power today? It tells you what's the price of power today. I think consumers want a certain amount of engagement. It's not every consumer, but there's a large number, and I look to the millennial generation who just grew up with information at their fingertips, right? They don't wait for information. They don't wait to go to the library, when they're in college or in high school. They just get information all the time. And so I think another important piece is providing the right information to everybody that wants to be involved in this solution long term. And there are going to be some people that never get involved, but our little app tells you what the price is. And, I think that makes some people think.
Yeah.
I think that there's a strong push in the generations behind me. There's probably plenty of green folks in my generation as well, but the next generation really cares about things. And they want to be informed, and they want to contribute most of all, right? So if they see something they can contribute towards, and you tell them, a little short today and the price is high, one of those two things is going to drive almost everybody, either the price or the shortage, right? So there's not too many people that you can't get into one of those categories.
Right. Yeah.
So those are some of the things I think that.
Yeah,
maybe.
that's great. Those are great. Pat?
Yeah, we're like a company that's as old as we are, over 100 years old as well. We're trying to do the things that we already do well, meaning take the information we have about what's our vision and translate that into winning products and solutions. So that's going on. And actually, when you were talking about bidirectional power flow, adaptive protection is a perfect example. It's a perfect example. So how do we make sure with our protection portfolio that we can address that? And the same thing with more traditional reliability and efficiency applications. How do we be faster, more cost effective, and more flexible in responding to whether it's a simple transfer switch scheme or a complex and sophisticated microgrid with a model-based optimization of a lot of different dispatchable generation sources and complex loads. So we're using what we think we do well, and that's a good thing. But what scares me about it is we still aren't as engaged as I think collectively in the market. Certainly I would like to be, because I'd like to get the best payback on investments that we make in development and resources as possible. And there's a part of our business too, that our PTI consulting business, where in addition to providing the intelligence and the software and the products that we have, actually having people that can help create the vision, work with customers to create the vision, do the planning work, whether you're an industrial or a utility customer, which is, I think, more and more relevant today. And we're investing there more and more capacity to do that effectively. But for me, to accelerate, and the iPhone, I think, was another really good example, because I had a BlackBerry too. I didn't love it, frankly. I think because I never figured out how to use it so well. But I can remember before I had my iPhone, people talking about the apps and just the huge proliferation of apps. That's a nice parallel for me, because I think there's so much data, more and more data being generated. We have some very traditional ways of talking about what we can do with it, and they're good, So situational awareness or asset health monitoring, predictive maintenance, those are great. But I think there are just an exponential number of other uses that I can't think of right now. And we won't think of them, or we won't get to them as quickly as possible if we aren't really much closer aligned between the consumer, the end user, and the utilities, and the vendors that are bringing the technology to market. It's exciting, but it's also a little bit frustrating, because, and it happens for natural reasons. We're a slow-moving, if we're honest with ourselves, we look ourselves in the mirror, we're a slow-moving pack. We're very conservative by nature on both sides. And I think that it's starting to change by necessity. So our ability to change that as quickly as we can, I think, is going to serve us well.
Okay. Wanda?
Yeah, I'm going to start with what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And then think about, where I think it's headed. But right now, we bring technology into the distribution space in order to provide self-healing and smart grid capability. And a big part of that is future-proofing it. So, positioning our customers so that they can see bidirectionally and can make sure that their infrastructure is flexible and dynamic, not only to achieve reliability gains today, but also position for microgrid interaction and, much more two-way power flow in the future. And I think that's really important, that the bets we're placing now, the money that we put down on these technical changes, you get one shot at it. And, I think going forward, we're going to have to do better kind of integrating and connecting the data and elevating it and saying, how do we get the operational efficiencies out of this? What are the data points that we're collecting along the way in order to yield improvements in operations, get more out of the infrastructure, improve maintenance capability, extend life cycle, so you're actually seeing bottom line implications. And in many respects, I think what we've deployed, it tends to be a bit siloed in nature. And I think the opportunity now lies in kind of taking all of the smarts and making sense out of it. So, I see that as opportunity going down the road, certainly. And then, there's this edge of grid opportunity where, the microgrid interface back into the traditional distribution system, I think, is going to be just tremendous for technology development, regulatory reform, market development. In fact, Cheryl, you mentioned, I think from the ISO perspective, there's going to be a lot of eyes on the edge of what's going on from the distribution side and reverse power flow, right? And you think about globally, there's many parts of the world, Europe, for example, Australia, where they're seeing much more reverse power flow than we are in the States. We've got pockets here, but I think there's some early indications that at that interface, we're going to have to figure out how to manage it. So, I believe going forward, we're going to evolve to distribution operators of sorts that has a communication language back into the ISOs. Have no idea how that's going to transform, but I do think that the utilities are going to have a significant play, if not own it. But we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen. And in the end, remember, reliability is of the utmost importance. So as we overlay complexity and as we kind of change the purpose, if you will, from a central to a distributed, we have to have that reliability trump card on the table at all times and figure out how we're going to not only maintain that, but also, continue to evolve it with the digital economy in a world where, load growth is either plateaued or going down. So it opens up the door for new business models in order to make sure that happens.
Right. So interestingly enough, and get ready for your questions. We'll do one last question. So I don't know if there are mics to come and get the questions for at the side of the stage, how we're doing that. But there are some interesting also, trends impacting the capabilities, right? So mobile, social, cloud, big data, right? And all those are tools, if you will, that we can, utilize to create maybe this hybrid new ecosystem that is centralized and distributed, and a lot of renewable, maybe dwindling fossil fuel at some point to zero, and then a lot of efficiency and conservation and no waste. But can you walk us through sort of your 1 minute view of what does the grid look like 10 years from now? ERCOT is doing settlements today, 15-minute intervals with meter reads at the edge of the grid. Very sophisticated nodal market. What does that look like 10 years from now? One that talked about self-healing, two-way power flow. Can we see that? Can we have an autonomous grid like autonomous cars 10 years from now? What does that look like? Just tell the audience your own words, 1 minute. What does that grid look like 10 years from now?
Well, I think it has even more diversity than it has today, right? And I think you touched on a lot of those things. I think that it has storage, it has big storage, it has small storage, it has big stations, it has little stations, it has my personal little distributed setup off my solar, off my roof. So I would say the grid looks more diverse, and that makes it essential that we know the important pieces of information that need to flow between all of the parties involved. And that it's, otherwise it won't work, right? So it has to be very free-flowing information with the right data, and we have to have, I guess it's the grid operator, still remains to be seen. I think we'll still be up at the high level, and wanted to describe there's probably some piece of interface down there. And so I don't know 10 years down the road whether that's really interface or if it's just another meter that's being settled. So, but those are the things that we're going to have to understand. Is it just that we might see occasionally a different direction of flow off that, but more diverse, more distributed, lots of storage, and lots of renewables.
Okay. Pat?
Yeah, I would say a version of the same thing. For me, it's you hear it referred to as a grid of grids, and I think that's where we are today with in terms of capability. And I think there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to it either. We're already offering some of this technology as a service, cloud-based service, which is a little bit of a departure from traditional approach in the utility world, but it's not that much of a stretch from a technology standpoint. So I think in some cases it gives access to technology to players that otherwise might not have the scale or the backing to make it happen. Clearly, you're right, Wanda, the efficiency and reliability they're table stakes. We have to continue to move forward there, and I'm sure that's going to be the case. What I'm really interested to see is now with this edge-of-grid distribution, the role that the utility continues to play, and it's something that even in the last couple of years I've seen some change. More utility interest in community-level solar, for example. And what I like about that is it's easier to work with that set of customers, that class of customers, than the prosumer, wide-open prosumer world. I'm sure that we are already in a situation where it's bidirectional power flow, the emergence of the prosumer, but my hope is that we are going to continue to see utilities now stepping to the front and being proactive in terms of taking control, instead of reacting and being forced to enable their assets to be used for that kind of work.
Right. Wanda? 10 years from now.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. So, it's,
We're not having a Jerry Springer moment.
it wasn't pre-planned either. So, I do think that the technologies and the infrastructure is going to evolve significantly, and we've talked about that quite a bit. One thing that is a foregone conclusion, 10 years from now, the workforce is going to look a lot different. Right? We all know that our demographic is kind of tilted to the right in terms of we have an aging workforce, and 10 years from now, a lot of that's going to churn out. So I think that we'll have much more diversity in the workforce, and we have certainly seen a lot of studies that breeds innovation. I do believe that we are seeing a convergence of computer, communications, power systems, and with that turnover workforce provides an opportunity to bring in some of those skill sets. But the trick really is kind of evolving the culture so that we can actually make this stuff happen. Talking about it is one thing, but actually having the skill sets and moving it to reality does take the people and the competencies to really put the ideas into action. So it's incumbent upon us to preserve the legacy knowledge, that hands-on, what we've grown up with through all our careers, and actually get that moved into those that are coming in, but also take advantage of the unique skill sets that those folks will have in order to expedite the rate of innovation. And I think that's going to actually hold a lot of keys to taking the smarts and actually leveraging that for better utilization, better efficiency, new thinking in terms of rate models in order to get there from here, doing more with less, if you will, because we can actually leverage their backgrounds and do things in much different ways than we have in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that said, if anybody is going to ask a question, do we have a mic for the questions? How are we doing there? Is there anything else? Okay, well, so I'll repeat your question. Give me a second. So all this innovation has clearly sparked a lot of interest, right? So I can't think of, there's all these companies. So for example, I talked about all these trends of cloud, mobile, social, big data. So you got companies like GridMates trying to do transactive energy, working with the utilities. You got companies like Grid4C trying to do big data and analytics with the utilities to accelerate all kinds of things from customer engagement to grid optimization. You got companies like Hive Computing trying to build a supercomputer leveraging idle processing power on smart meters to solve genome problems. You got companies like Clear World trying to do solar power LED street lights to basically collaborate to do all kinds of cool DG applications and services for a city in partnership with the utility. So I can, there's so many cool things going on for that, but does anybody have a question? Do we have? Good. If you can stand up, say your name, and I'll repeat your question.
Yeah, Harry Weber, Bloomberg. I just had a quick ERCOT question.
Yeah.
5 hours of negative pricing this morning, was that 1 to 5 a.m.? Was that a record in terms of duration?
Oh, I don't think that was a record.
So the question was 1 to 5 a.m. negative prices. Was that a record for ERCOT?
I don't know that that was the specific hours, but we did have negative pricing. And I would say we probably had, especially this time of year where we have the potential for high wind and low loads because we don't have a heavy air conditioning load or heating load or anything. I couldn't tell you that fact from the stage as to whether that's the longest duration. I don't know.
Questions? If you can raise your hand. Can we get the lights up, turned up a little? We can see the audience. Questions, anybody? Come on, chime in.
There's one.
Yell it.
All right, for ERCOT, what are you doing to make sure that your generation is pure and doesn't spike? Unfortunately, the new high efficiency motors won't take the spikes like the old ones would. I put an air conditioning system in 2 years ago. In less than 2 years, one of the motors went out, they said because of voltage spikes, which wouldn't have hurt.
I think that your question is about what is ERCOT doing to make sure that power doesn't spike, but really that's going to be down at the lower levels beyond the ERCOT realm of control. So I think that'd be a great question for Siemens or S&C.
I would comment that we're trying to do a better job of marrying together efficiency and reliability. There's been I think more of a focus on reliability for a time, and especially now with more renewables out on the feeders, we end up with power quality issues. And that is an area where I think the technology, the curve is maybe still a little bit steep. I think actually, Wanda, you were talking about power electronics out at the edge of the grid, and I don't think there's for me anyway, a clear one answer to that. But that's an area where we in Siemens are investing in, and particularly in marrying together the power quality through efficiency and reliability in one solution. And let me say, I should have qualified that a little bit, in terms of distributed logic too. So out on the feeders and not dependent on what may be running very effectively as a control center, enterprise level solution. So that tends to be a lot of times local load issue that you have to solve locally.
Anything to add to that?
No, I do think that we assume that the loads will look in the future like they've looked in the past, and it's way not true, right? So with the electronics, we're seeing a lot of power quality issues. We're seeing voltage issues. And I do think that we're going to have to kind of go back to assumption number one of, what's on that feeder and how do you maintain stability and make sure that, and it requires technology, it's going to require a rethink on standards and certainly a lot of changes from the operational front. So it's an opportunity in one sense, but back to your point, it's a challenge in the present day, and I think that it's something that we'll end up working through together. I also agree with Pat. I think the distributed logic, it wasn't that long ago when we're sitting in a room going, I don't know if it will or won't happen. And now I think, we're seeing that there's so much dynamic activity out there. You get beyond the substation fence, and you have to have distributed logic and control in order to stay up with the changing conditions. So I believe that we're going to get much more comfortable operating in that environment, and we're on a journey now.
Right. Anyone else? Stand up, don't be shy. Stand up, say your name.
My name is Jeff Mucci. I'm with RCR Wireless News, and so I have an interest in wireless technology and business Internet of Things. So my question for anyone who fielded is, how has the use of wireless technology changed over the last decade and changed in the future? And everybody's been talking about industrial Internet of Things, or how's that affecting your business?
Well, from a communications perspective, I still think it's the Achilles heel on the distribution side. And certainly communications have evolved significantly, and we're able to do much more than what we have in the past, but I don't think we're there yet. So, I think that wireless offers certainly significant advantage and is likely our future. And it will be augmented with every kind of communication form you can imagine, but I do think that there is room to improve in terms of making sure the frequencies are there, making sure that adequate throughput, bandwidth, and reliability is there, especially in applications where you gotta have it. So we've done really well. Congratulations, but there's still room to go.
So a follow up on that. So in this world of two-way power flow, self-healing, all things aside, assuming that the cost is not a barrier, that's an issue that is overcome, do we need real-time communications to every device on the grid? Do you see that need in a two-way power flow, distributed, centralized, renewable, efficiency? Do we need real-time communications? Do we need?
No.
No.
No. So actually, I've got this little chart that, as if you can imagine, a protection application at the top and meters at the bottom, and there could be 30 different things scattered up and down that for different applications, if you will. But you don't treat a relay the same way you do a meter. None of us would. So I think that you really got to wrap your head around the application, the amount of data, the importance of it getting through, and map out the communication infrastructure accordingly. And it's not necessarily where you are today, but also anticipating what that infrastructure is going to need in the future. And it's probably not one; it's probably many, because the needs vary so much across the board. And it is interesting that often we get into this stumbling block of, there's got to be one that suits all. And then we head down that path and you start realizing, gee, the one I picked won't quite get there from here. And you end up overlaying and kind of backfitting it in, if you will, in order to suit the particular application. But, I don't think real time is needed for everything, but certainly near real time is needed for some.
Okay.
I would supplement it because I think you just hit the nail on the head, your last comment. It depends on what you want to do. If you're really driving efficiency, no, you don't need real-time communications at all. But if you're trying to drive reliability on a critical load, a hospital, or we did a project in Lower Manhattan that absolutely, there had to be an investment in communications. And our strategy there, even though we acquired RuggedCom some years ago with great technology, is we need to be communications agnostic. We've got to be able to work with whatever the customer is using. And that's actually a fun part of the job. We've been pretty successful in doing that so far. And one of the real enablers for us to do, down outside the distribution substation, down the feeders, one of the real enablers has been the fact that now more utilities are investing in communications. They're ready to make that investment.
Right. Last question. Stand up. Say your name, company, and shoot it.
It ties into the conversation about the reliability, the ultimate goal, right? The utilities need to bring the power and keep it on. And your tools that you're providing to improve reliability and the communications question. I work on the distribution side, and my ultimate goal is to predict every possible outage out there. It's a dream, of course, but I know that having the data at a high resolution is the key to being able to develop models that can predict your outages, or say, you have a disturbance in the system, something is going wrong. Now, the smart meters can do only so much. We need tools like switches, the DA devices, right? We need tools, and there are standalone measurement devices that you can buy and put them. Just So the power quality, the harmonics, all this stuff is coming in. But from what I know, so we're really, if you're doing this, then you are really in big data realm, right? And you need the methods, the tools, you need big, large computer clusters, you need the data scientists in there, you need to be digging through this data and trying to find out the characteristics of the upcoming faults. You're absolutely right, you cannot transfer this data back to the utility. 3 of them generate 1 million meters. But the people who make these tools need to be able to understand this data, right? I mean, you take 3 of them, you put them on, and you need to be able to have the infrastructure to collect this data, analyze it, develop the model, and maybe put it inside the tool of tomorrow. Do you guys have big data capabilities?
We have software capabilities, and we're certainly adding to that. There's recognition that information that's coming from switches and trip savers and the like is very valuable, and we need to be able to allow the customers the opportunity to not only understand what's happening at that location, but it becomes part of a bigger puzzle. And you are absolutely correct. I think that the models aspect, as you move from a centralized to a distributed scene where there's a lot of dynamic activity in the distribution space and on the customer side, we are way lacking on the modeling capability there. And it's a combination of being able to kind of extrapolate the reality and overlay it with the modeling capability to anticipate. And one of my thoughts on the 10-year view is that we would easily be able to trade off local decisions with traditional investments and be able to figure out which one makes sense. But in order to be there, you've got to understand the value of the VAR at that location and the capacity at that location. And we just don't have the analytic and the modeling capability kind of sorted out to that extent yet. So that is an opportunity that lays in front of us. I think we have bits and pieces, but it's incumbent upon all of us to leverage that to get to the next step.
Anything else?
Yeah, I would say that's a topic that's more and more common, for sure. We've, I think, done a pretty good job of getting faster and faster in responding, being reactive, but we aren't proactive enough yet. And ironically, we have a technology workshop with one of our big customers on the West Coast next month. That's one of the items that's on the list. And we have some capability. There's data available, and we're apparatus companies, so we understand what may be a failing piece of apparatus looks like, what kind of a signature it creates. But now, how do we make sure we're developing this in a way that can be consumed and ultimately delivers the right actionable intelligence? We're not there yet.
All right. Cheryl, anything else? Parting comments?
No, thank you for the challenging questions.
All
Thanks
right.
to the audience.
Well, if you could please give me a hand for the panel. Thank you very much, Wanda, Pat, Cheryl.